Does anybody here enjoy biographies? Anybody like those? Anybody got a favorite biography? No, it takes a minute to think about it, doesn't it? I enjoy biographies, and I actually got on this week and looked on Amazon to see what the top-selling biographies were for 2026, and it was kind of an interesting mix of books that are topping the charts on those this year. The very top, number one pick was a book called The Accidental President, Harry S. Truman and the 4 Months That Changed the World. And Harry S. Truman, he became president after Franklin Delano Roosevelt died, and so he assumed office in that way. He did go ahead and serve another term. The only president that was from Missouri. And one of my favorite stories about Harry S. Truman is on his desk he had a sign that said, "The buck stops here." And I think about that often. Like as people who are responsible for other people, we have to assume responsibility, and I appreciate his example in that. As you look down the list, though, there's some other interesting biographies selling this year. The Mamba Mentality, How I Play by Kobe Bryant is number 2 right now on the Amazon charts for biographies. Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey, his autobiography, is another one that's on the top. There were several biographies about women who shaped history. There's a book called A Woman of No Importance, The Untold Story of the American Spy Who Helped Win World War II. A story about a lady named Virginia Hall who helped greatly and has not been probably talked about a lot. But there's a book about her. We the Women, The Hidden Heroes Who Shaped America. A book about several unsung women heroes from the Revolutionary War, 1776, and how they helped us win our freedom. And a pretty interesting book for this year where we're 250 years old, and just to think about all the people who had a hand in that, getting us where we are today. And then there's a book called The Queen and Her Presidents, The Hidden Hand That Shaped History, a book about Queen Elizabeth and her long-term impact on not just her country, but the world. And then rounding that all out was a book called The Billionaire Who Wasn't, How Chuck Feeney Secretly Made and Gave Away a Fortune. Now, as you think about biographies, why do we read those? Probably we're interesting, we're curious, but I think a lot of it's because we want to know their secret sauce, right? We look and we see like, wow, you really did something that's amazing, that we really respect, I admire, I wish I had more of it. So maybe if I read your book and I learn from your practices, maybe I could have some of what you have. So I want to read and find out what Kobe ate so he was such a good shot, and I'm going to eat those things. I'm going to read and find out what Matthew McConaughey, what shampoo he uses to get his hair so stylish, and I'm going to use that shampoo. Right? I'm going to read Chuck Feeney's book, and I'm just going to pour over that because, man, wouldn't it be great to be able to not just make a fortune, but to use that to bless others? He was a great philanthropist. And, so what's your morning routine? What's your strategy? Where are you investing? We want to learn from their lifestyle habits. And so I just want us to think about that because, we've got access to the 4 greatest biographies ever written right here this morning. The 4 greatest biographies ever written are known as the Gospels of Jesus Christ according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So do we read those the same way as we read those other biographies? I think a lot of times we read it because we want to learn knowledge. We want to understand Jesus' teaching so I can understand intellectually the things that he says. I think we enjoy his stories. He was the master storyteller, and we retell his parables over and over again because they inspire us. We mine the scriptures to find inspirational quotes so that we can uplift our day and put them on a t-shirt so we feel better. But do we read the Gospels of Jesus Christ saying, man, I want to learn the practices of Jesus so that I can follow him and become more like him? Because that's how we need to read those. We're right in the middle of a series talking about spiritual disciplines, and we've talked already about contemplation and confession. We're going to talk about prayer and rest here over the next 2 weeks. And as we think about practices, spiritual disciplines, they're ways that Christians throughout the centuries have tried to do things as a routine to help them grow in their relationship with Jesus and become deeper in their spiritual life. Dallas Willard, who I mentioned a couple weeks ago, a great theologian. He was a theology professor out in California, but he grew up here in Dallas County. He says this about the disciplines. He says, the disciplines are activities of the mind and body purposely undertaken to bring our personality and total being into effective cooperation with the divine order. They enable us more and more to live in a power that is strictly speaking beyond us, deriving from the spiritual realm itself. That's a lot of words, right? And so I would just want to boil that down for us today to say that the spiritual disciplines are simply the practices of Jesus. And we need to figure out how to apply them to our life. So as we read the Gospels, we're going to see there is a fair amount of teaching, but the majority of the text are stories about Jesus, about what he did, how he acted, how he treated others. And so in that, it's a biography. And we'll see very often what Jesus did is he modeled or exampled something, and then he turned around and asked the people following him to says, hey, just do what I did. Like he was always kind of living that way in the way that he made disciples. And so if we really read the Gospels, I think in that way, we're going to see Jesus transform before our eyes from a teacher to a suffering servant who has some practices we need to learn from. Why do you follow Jesus? Think about that for a minute. Why do you follow Jesus? Pretty much everybody in the world isn't going to argue with you if you say Jesus is a good teacher. Almost everybody agrees with that. Even secular atheists quote Jesus and say, hey, you should treat others as you want to be treated. That's something everybody agrees on. But if you dig deeper into Jesus' teaching, you're going to find some difficult and controversial things. Jesus himself said that if you want to follow him, you've got to hate your father and your mother. He said that if you follow him, you won't have anywhere to sleep. He said that if you follow him, you're going to need to eat his body and drink his blood. And he says that if you're going to follow him, you have to understand and agree that he is God. And very often when Jesus got up and said those kind of things, guess what happened to the crowd? They left. That's exactly right. Yeah. They're like, that's tough. I'm out. Right? But the disciples stuck around. They followed him. And you've stuck around and you're following him. So why? I don't know where your spiritual journey started. Maybe for some of you, it just started out of habit and tradition. Your family had always done it, so you did it. Maybe it started out for you obligation because mom said you had to. Maybe today you're here because dad said you had to be here, or maybe mom told you to be here for dad. Anyway, whatever. You're here, maybe out of obligation today. Some of us, maybe we started this thing off because of curiosity, like, man, everyone's talking about Jesus and I don't know much about him. I want to come find out more. Maybe you got excited because you saw something spiritual and man, you got excited about how it made you feel. But I think if you stuck around very long, it's because of this. At some point, you came up against something in your life that you couldn't handle, that you couldn't figure out, that you couldn't get past, and you cried out to Jesus, and he did something about it, and that's why you stuck with it. And I would say that for most of us, the reason we follow Jesus is simply because of his compassion towards us, because he cares about us, and he does things in our life that we can't do. We're going to be looking at Mark's gospel today. We're going to start in chapter 1, so if you want to find Mark chapter 1, we'll be there in a minute. Of all of those 4 biographies, Mark is the shortest and the fastest and the most action-packed. Man, he doesn't spend a lot of time talking about words. He spends a lot of time talking about activities and events. And even if you get into the first chapter, he's got the shortest, most generic version of Jesus' entry into the world. He really doesn't talk about his birth. He just says, hey, Jesus came and fulfilled some things, so let's get ready and let's go. And the very first thing he does is he just goes out and he just starts calling some disciples. And then he says, hey, guys, let's go do some ministry. And so they start in a town called Capernaum. And so it says they all went to Capernaum, and Jesus got in there and he began to teach. And Mark doesn't even slow down enough to tell us what he taught about, but he does slow down enough to tell us who he healed after he taught. Because he healed a demon-possessed man. And the next thing you know, he's at Peter's house and he's healing Peter's mother-in-law. And then we're going to jump in here at verse 32 and find out what happens after that. It says, when evening came, after the sun had set, they brought to him all those who were sick and demon-possessed. See, the word got out. Jesus is healing people. He's taking care of needs. And so everyone showed up. It says the whole town was assembled at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and drove out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place. And there he was praying. Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, everyone's looking for you. He's like, man, we've got people breaking down the doors wanting to get healed, and you're out here praying like we got a job to do. And Jesus said to them, let's go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come. So why did Jesus come? It wasn't to heal people, was it? Because he said, hey man, there's a host of people here who still need to be healed. And Jesus said, no, we're going to the next town because I came to preach the good news of the kingdom of God. That's why Jesus said he came. That was his mission statement, was to let the world know the hope that was going to come to the world through him and through his sacrifice on the cross. So why did he heal so many people along the way? He came to preach to the people, and he came to care for the people. And it's because he cares about you. And so let's go on and see what happens next here, because it says, he went into all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. Then a man with leprosy came to him and on his knees begged him, if you're willing, you can make me clean. See, he understood that Jesus had the power to do this. He just wondered if Jesus would. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him, something no one would have done in that culture. Nobody would touch a leper. He says, I'm willing, and he told him, be made clean. So Jesus very often would take time, and he would notice people who were hurting and lost and broken and downcast and sick. And even if it meant that it was a detour from his main purpose and his main mission, you know what he would do? He would heal people. He would care for people. He would share with people. He would listen to people. And why did he do that? It says right here, because he was moved by compassion. So today, as we think about the next practice that we want to put in our life, that is our next practice, and it's a practice of Jesus. And compassion is always going to move us out of our current path. It's always going to cause us to have to redirect and reconfigure. Now, if we went ahead and read on through the rest of Mark's gospel, we would see that this keeps happening. It happens to another demon-possessed man. It happens to a lady who had had a bleeding condition for years. It happened to an official that came and his daughter was dying, and Jesus went off track, went off path, went to his house and healed this little girl. One day they were going along and he saw a funeral procession, and he was so moved to compassion for this poor widow who had no one else, he went and raised her son from the dead. Later, when Jesus' friend Lazarus dies, it says he went to the tomb and he wept. And then he raised Lazarus from the dead. Even on the day that Jesus was entering Jerusalem, getting ready for the week that was going to end with him on the cross, knowing that this mission was ahead of him, he stopped on the way into Jerusalem and healed 2 blind men and gave them sight. Jesus was always stopping and paying attention to those in need. This term, moved to compassion, is actually only found in the biographies of Jesus. The Greek word that we see here, which is splanchnon, that's a great word, isn't it? Everybody say that with me, splanchnon. Well, that's a lot of fun, right? So it only appears in the biographies of Jesus. It doesn't appear in any other Greek literature. It doesn't appear in the Old Testament. The Greek translation of the Old Testament is only here. Now, if we go to the Old Testament, there's some words that are translated into compassion, but they're more about feelings and emotions, about how God is merciful and he's caring and he's kind and he's faithful. But it is in the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus Christ that compassion takes action. See, splanchnon is a verb. It's action. It's something that's going to happen, that we're going to do something. Its literal translation is a striving of the bowels. Isn't that a great visual image this morning? Right? And it's just kind of this idea that something is so important, so moving, so challenging, so difficult that, man, we just feel all churned up inside about it. It says that's how Jesus feels when he sees our need. That's how he feels when he sees our lostness and our separation from God. And it moved him so much that he came and he joined us here. God came in the flesh and walked among us because he was moved by compassion. And he decided to do something about our situation. He was moved by it. And so one of the first things we have to understand about being moved to compassion is it always closes distances. Man, this is really funny to me. I'd already planned to talk about this today, but God happened to give us a thunderstorm and a tornado warning all in one day, right? So anybody here like thunderstorms? I love thunderstorms, right? Like Wednesday night, there was a thunderstorm rolling in after church, and man, it was just like a light show out there, and I just loved it, right? And so whenever a storm comes, you know what I do? I go on the porch and watch it. So in between services, you know what I was doing? I was on the porch watching the rain, watching the storms roll, and I just love it. Now, my wife does too. Like, we talk about this. We love the energy of it and the wind and the sizzle in the air and just all of that's just like exhilarating. But when it becomes a tornado warning, you know what my wife is doing? She's throwing kids in closet and putting mattresses over them, right? And I just want to say I'm so thankful for our leaders and our teams that care for us. And thanks for everybody doing quick action to get us orderly in a safe place this morning for that tornado warning. But just so you know, I'm that guy that Brett was talking about that's probably going to wind up outside even with the tornado warning, right? Like that's me. But why did we change, right? We were excited about a thunderstorm, but when it becomes a tornado warning, we get excited in a different way because it's more immediate. See, as long as things are in the distance, they don't feel urgent. But once we're in the path of destruction, it changes. And for us, in the same way, as we think about the people around us that need God's love and care and compassion, if we keep them at a distance, we don't feel very urgent about it. And so compassion moves us closer. In our culture, we have a lot of ways, I think, that we build space and distance from other people. One of the ways that we do that is language. We like to put things into categories. I do. I like to categorize things. But unfortunately, sometimes we categorize people, and we begin talking about us and those people. Dr. Stephen Argue is a sociologist with Fuller Seminary, and he works with an organization called the Fuller Youth Institute, and he's done just a wonderful job researching the church culture and youth culture in America today, in the West Coast, or in the Western world today. And he says this about what tends to happen between older generations and younger generations. He says, youth ministry leaders, and really all of us, run the risk of viewing people's lives in this way. Maybe you have a positive view of young people today. Maybe you think, man, you are the hope and of the present and the future church. And we like to say that a lot, right? We love it that we have kids here. We love it that we got hope for the future. But sometimes people also have a negative view of youth culture, and they might say, but there's a lot of them that are leavers and dones and nuns, and man, I don't know why more of them aren't showing up or sticking around. But the thing that Dr. Argue points out is that both of those vantage points share the same problem, which is distance. We say, those kids over there, either we have a positive view or a negative view, but we have not taken the time to really get close. And so he goes on and says, both perceptions are offered from safe places that fail to get close enough to understand young people's true experiences. Because it's a lot more complex than just those two statements. And we do that in all sorts of ways, don't we? We do that with youth culture, generational differences, poverty, politics. We could just go on and on. We categorize things so that we keep a safe distance. But compassion tells us we got to move closer. We also sometimes, I think, create distance with systems. Just like with categories, we like to create systems to solve problems so we know what to do when a problem arises. But the trouble with systems is very often they get to a place where finally you have got a system in place, and when a problem comes up, you say, oh, someone else is taking care of that because we have a system for that. And we forget to stop and notice the person that has the problem. We create distance. And we even do that with charity. Giving is good. Giving is something God tells us to do. Giving is a blessing, but very often what charities do is they draw on our heartstrings, don't they? They say, look at those poor people and how bad their situation is, and if you give us money, we'll fix it. And so we give because we pulled our heartstrings, and then we kind of get rid of our guilt by giving, but we never really ask the questions of why do they have problems in the first place, and what do those people really need? And because we just see the problem and we don't see the people, and we create distance. Jesus calls us to move closer. He says, you'll always have the poor among you. The question is, are you among them? And so let's turn over to Mark chapter 6 today. And as we continue in Mark's gospel, we're going to see a really great example of how Jesus shows us to deal with those kind of situations. This chapter, if we would read all of it, it starts with the kind of rapid succession of a lot of events. Starts out with Jesus going back home to Nazareth and preaching in his hometown, and the people reject him. They're like, what do you know, carpenter's son? And it doesn't go very well for him. And so he leaves Nazareth, and then he immediately takes his disciples who've been following him for a little while now and says, I'm going to send you guys out now, 2 by 2, to go out and do some ministry. And so it's a new season of ministry where Jesus had modeled things, and now he sent them off to do the things that they'd modeled. While they were out touring and traveling cities and doing ministry, he found out, Jesus did, that his cousin John the Baptist was murdered for his message. And so he's kind of starting to mourn the loss of his cousin, and the disciples come back. And so we kind of find this moment where Jesus is dealing with a lot of emotions, a lot of change. And he says, hey guys, why don't we just kind of get away and take a little bit of a retreat and just kind of absorb all this. And so this is where we jump into here, Mark 6, picking up in verse 30. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. He said to them, come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while. For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they went away in a boat by themselves to a remote place, but many saw them leaving and recognized them, and they ran on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. And when Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd and had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And then he began to teach them many things. I just want to say, as we get ready to dig into this, that as we talk about all these ancient practices and spiritual disciplines that God wants to work in our life, that they often aren't in nice, neat, compartmentalized packages. Because in this one section, we see contemplation and retreat and rest and prayer and compassion and action. And so they're all kind of usually mingled up together. And the first thing that we have to learn from Jesus about compassion is that moving closer means I have to say I'm willing to get involved and not be absolved from dealing with this problem. I gave you all that context about what was going on in Jesus' life just to see the tension of this moment of this crowd asking Jesus to do something for him. Do you see any potential there for Jesus to be frustrated? It's like, man, I can't even get away with my disciples for 1 minute. Like there's always these people always asking for stuff. Would there be any reason there that Jesus could have just said, hey guys, not today. No miracles today. It's just me and the disciples. Sorry. We're closed for business, right? Like he could have done that. And we wouldn't have felt like he was doing anything wrong. We feel those tensions, but what did he do? It says he was moved by compassion when he saw the people. And he just points out to us that ministry, compassion, caring for others rarely comes at the right time. It's rarely convenient. It rarely doesn't take a big sacrifice for us emotionally and physically and spiritually to do that, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't. And Jesus was willing, just like the leper asked him, are you willing? And Jesus was. And part of that, I think, is because moving closer, the closer we get to people, the more likely their circumstances are going to break our heart. Why did Jesus care for this crowd, it said? Because he saw they were lost and hurting and hungry, and they had no idea where to turn, and he knew he had the answer, and so he was willing to share his message with them. Notice where he starts. He doesn't start with taking care of their physical needs. He starts by saying, hey, I just want you to know the truth about the kingdom, why I've come, and why it's important for you to hear this. And he begins to preach to them, and it's because he knew their story. Jesus has one up on us. He's God, and he knows everything. So he didn't have to ask. He already knew that just by looking at them. But what do we have to do? We have to ask. We have to take time to get to know people's story. We shouldn't assume that we understand where they're at or why they're where they're at or why they have the problems that they have. We need to ask. We need to sit down. We need to slow down and talk to people and say, hey, tell me what's going on in your life. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what your needs are. Tell me how I can help you with what's going on. And I think the more that we listen to people, first of all, they feel seen and heard, but we also begin to have our perspective changed, and we begin to have compassion for those people when we hear their story. And ultimately, Jesus shows us that moving closer makes us advocates, us helping those who don't have a way to help themselves. Jesus' disciples weren't quite as quick to have soft hearts toward this crowd. And so let's just read and kind of see their response to this situation, picking back up in verse 35. It says, when it grew late, his disciples approached him and said, this place is deserted and it is already late. Send them away so they can go into the surrounding countryside and villages to buy themselves something to eat. And so the disciples look and they don't see an opportunity. They see a problem. They're like, Jesus, there are a lot of people here. There's no McDonald's. We don't have enough food. Like I'm not sharing my lunch. And so we better send them home so they can fix their own problem. But what does Jesus say? He says, no, you give them something to eat. He responded. And they said to him, should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? They're like, there's no way. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough. There's not enough stores. There's not enough bread. There's no way we can do this. And Jesus just simply reminds them, he says, hey, but have you stopped to even take inventory? Do you even know what resources you have around you? And so he says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. And we'll find out here in a minute, there's 5,000 men plus women and children. So we're talking like 10,000 people minimum, right? They're like, where's 5 loaves and 2 fish going to go? But they inventoried like Jesus asked. And then he instructed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. And he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves. And he kept giving them to his disciples to set before the people. I love that part. He just kept giving them. It's like, here's some more bread. Here's some more bread. Here's some more bread. He just kept giving them. See, the thing that the disciples missed in their inventory was Jesus. He was right there. And if they just brought what little they had to him, guess what he was going to do? He was going to multiply it. He also divided the 2 fish among them all, and everyone ate and was satisfied. Everybody. And they picked up 12 baskets full of pieces of bread and fish for snacks for later, because snacks later are good. Now those who had eaten the loaves were 5,000 men. And so Jesus calls his disciples to have a different perspective. He says, when you see the needs of the people, even if it's overwhelming to you, anyone ever look around your life and just be a little overwhelmed with all the need? You know, we live in this weird culture where we see the news from around the world 24/7, and it can be very overwhelming. And we're like, who am I to do anything? These are just problems, and I see no solutions. And Jesus says, just come and bring the little bit you have, and look at the people who are right around you that you have influence over, and give what little bit you have, and I'm going to multiply that, and I'm going to do great things. To be an advocate doesn't mean you have to have all the answers, doesn't mean you have to have all the resources. It just means that you're willing to use the resources you do have. Your position, your time, your talents, your finances, whatever you do have, to come and bring him and say, Jesus, I'm willing to use these for the needs around me. Show me what to do. And he's going to meet you and multiply that in such great ways. So it takes us asking these kind of questions. What do people around me really need? And when Jesus looked at these crowds, he saw what they really needed. In this crowd here, he saw that they thought they needed bread, but what they really needed was the bread of life. And he saw those people who needed healed, and they thought that they needed physical healing, but what they really needed was spiritual healing. Now, sometimes he jumped in and done the lesser thing first just to get their attention, but really he was going for their heart. And for us, the same things. As we look around the people around us, they may think they know what they need, and they may come to you and say, this is what I think I need, but we need to be willing to ask, what do they really need? They need the Lord. They need the truth and the hope of Jesus, and we have that, and we can offer that to them. And so Jesus' example is closing distances and inviting people closer, and he wants us to do the same thing. You know, today I just want you to think about what moves you, what churns your guts, what gets you like, man, I can't not do something about this. You know, today's Father's Day, and I know Brett kind of recognized you guys a few minutes ago, and I just want to say, I read this week there's 72 million dads in America. And there's 29 million of us that are also grandddads, and I'm thankful I'm one of those this year. So, yeah, so I'm grateful for that. You know, but dads, they've found over and over again, sociologists have, that the presence of a dad in the home makes such a huge impact on the outcome of an adult child. Like it's just huge. And so dads, thank you for showing up. Thank you for leading your families. Thank you for being here today and being a part of the solution. And like Brett said, we've got a great gift for you, and we want to give that to you on the way out today. You know, dads are a little harder than moms to find gifts for. Brett also mentioned that. You know, we did Mother's Day a month ago, and you know, it's easy. You buy a mom a plant or a flower. You make sure you take care of dinner today and dishes today, and maybe fold some laundry. And man, you are on top shelf stuff. Like they it's not that hard to figure that stuff out. Guys, we're a little bit harder because we buy all our own toys, don't we? We ask for forgiveness, not permission. We just go do what we want. And so, like, what does a dad need? He already bought it, right? So, but there's 3 things I know that dads always like. They like food, they like tools, and they like experiences. And so I just want to encourage you, you know, if you've not done anything, it's not too late. Go online on your way out, buy a gift card to your dad's favorite restaurant, their favorite sporting goods store, their favorite hardware store. But then when you give it to them, I want you to say this: hey, and I'll go with you, and let's do this together. Because dads like doing things together. And so that's just a little tidbit for you guys if you forgot. It was Father's Day. Anyway, but why do we give things to our dads? It's because dads are given to us. You know, they've laid down their life for us. They've provided for us. They've cared for us. They've stayed up late nights. They've done the hard things. And so we want to give back to them. And it's really interesting. As a matter of fact, one of the ways that the Bible tells us to have compassion is comparing it to a father to his children. In Psalm 103, it says, as a father has compassion on his children. As a father has looked at his children and saw their needs and showed up and done the hard things and been advocates for them, just like dads have done that, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. Isn't that good news? God has compassion on you. He loves you. He cares for you. He wants to give back to you. And so today, as we think about that, it should move us to follow his example, to have compassion on others. And really, I think it just takes 2 things. First of all, it takes prioritizing people. We remember that people are the point, that it's not problems, it's not solutions, it's not systems, it's people. And so So the Bible tells us over and over again that people are valuable because God made them, and that gives us inherent value. And so we need to take time to invite people into our life and get to know them. And so, as we think about just even our congregation, how can we prioritize people? There's several ways. We're so thankful for our parents here. We've got so many young families here and growing families here, and we're staying thankful for that. Does everyone know that that's a really hard time of life? Raising kids is hard, and especially when they're young, and then when they become teenagers, it's even harder. And so it's just hard. And so we need to pray for our parents. Would you guys just commit to that? That we can pray for our parents here, but we need to do that. We're also thankful we have so many young people here. So many cool statistics. So last weekend we had our 3rd through 5th grade camp here. I think they told me 16 or 17 boys and 3 girls. So just imagine trying to keep 16 3rd through 5th grade boys alive, even for one night, overnight stay. Like, that was a challenge. Thank you, workers who did that and helped with that, who got no sleep that night. Right, Brett Schwenke? Right? So we're thankful for that. Last week we were doing some data. So we've got our K through 3rd launch, which is this 3rd week for that. We also have our preschool and our nursery. And in those 3 programs last week, I think we had 45 young people in there. And so we're just thankful, and we've got lots of middle schoolers, lots of teenagers. Man, we need to show up in their life, don't we? They need to know that they matter now. And we need to get to know them. We need to find what's going on in their life. What's interesting to them? Why are they coming here? What's going on in their life? And so, man, as you see young people, I just want you to be good question askers and invite them to tell you their story. Also, as we look around, we've got lots of people who are struggling. Lots of people who are in crisis. We've had a really rough few weeks here at church, a lot of hard things in a lot of people's lives. And I just want to say thank you, church. You've done a really good job for being the hands and feet of Jesus and showing up. I was in one situation a couple weeks ago, and people were showing up in someone's life, and somebody showed up, and they were next to me, and they said, I don't know what to do. And I said, just be here. And so we just need to be there in people's lives and be present. And that's what Jesus did for us, And because of that, we also have to take Jesus' message seriously. He came to preach the good news of the gospel. And that's why he showed up in people's lives. That's why he got near, and that's why he closed the distance, was to tell them the truth. Stephen Argue, when he was doing some of his research, he asked young people what words they would use to describe Jesus. And here's the words that they used: restoring, liberating, freeing, making new. I'm going to read those again. Listen to these. Restore. These are young people. Restoring, liberating, freeing, making new. Does anybody here need those in their life? Anybody need freed from something? Anybody need anything made new? Anybody need restored? Aren't you thankful that that's what Jesus does for us? For us today, as we think about responding to this, some of us, maybe we need those words in our life today. Maybe we need Jesus to show us compassion. The good news of the gospel, the good news of Jesus is this, is that he came to do just that. That's why he showed up. That's why he came down and walked this earth and suffered the way that he suffered. And that's why he died on the cross, is because he knew that none of you were right, that none of you are righteous, that none of you could fix your problems on your own. And he cared enough that he showed up and he closed the distance and he took care of it for you. And the Bible tells us that if we admit that we cannot control our lives on our own, that we are out of control, that our lives are full of disobedience and sin and rebellion and failure, and we say, God, I can't fix this, but I trust that you, God, Jesus, you can do this for me, and you invite him to do that in your life, it says that he will do that and you will be saved. And so maybe this morning, that's what you need, is to come and ask him to show you compassion. But once he's done that, he invites us to offer that to others. In addition to splanchnon, there's one other word in the Greek New Testament that is translated as compassion, and it's pasco. And pasco means suffering servant. And that's exactly who Jesus is. He came and laid his life down for us. He came and offered atonement for our sins. He came and empathized with our struggles and yet overcame them and gave us the opportunity for victory and hope for eternity. And he calls us to follow him. Peter was one of those guys who couldn't figure out how to get those guys a lunch that one day. And he was trying to figure out what to do. And later in his life, looking back, Peter says this. He says, "For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." Jesus was moved by compassion for you, and now he's inviting you to make the same move. Would you guys stand with me?